Our focus is on personal empowerment, resilience, a commitment to well-being, and a motivation to achieve more than ever thought possible. This week's guest is outstanding in this field. Rodney Scott has been a distinguished senior fellow for border security at the Texas Public Policy Foundation since 2021, following his service as the 24th Chief of the United States Border Patrol. During his 3-decade career in the Border Patrol, under both Republican and Democratic administrations, he earned the respect of administrators, agents, colleagues, and partners while working to successfully enforce our nation's laws and secure our borders. In a tribute to his leadership and integrity, Rodney has been described as, quote, the absolute embodiment of the U.S. Border Patrol's motto, honor first, end quote. In addition to serving as chief of our nation's 21,000 Border Patrol agents, Rodney Scott's past assignments included serving as chief patrol agent of the El Centro, California sector, assistant chief in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Office of Anti-Terrorism, and director of the Incident Management and Operations Coordination Division at Customs and Border Patrol headquarters in Washington, D.C. Rodney Scott, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Chris. Appreciate it.
That's a lot of stuff you've done. It's amazing. What a terrific career. First of all, thank you for that. There are so many big picture and policy questions, especially as it relates to cartels and human trafficking, that I'm really looking forward to discussing with you. But first, I want to start with your personal story. What motivated you to join the U.S. Border Patrol?
That could probably fill up the whole hour, but to kind of summarize it, there was a couple things that just kind of converged on each other. One, I was just raised and I always felt like I wanted to do a job that I gave back. So law enforcement, military, something where you're serving a bigger cause than just yourself. And then I love the outdoors. Through a weird chain of events, I was an Indiana farm kid. Through a weird chain of events, my family moved directly to the border in Arizona when I was in high school. To be honest, I wasn't a big fan at first. But once I discovered the Southwest, going off-road, four-wheeling, hiking, everything else, I kind of fell in love with it. And then, as you grow up, you got to start looking at a career. And my career path, actually, I chose to be a pilot. So I went through school to become a commercial pilot with the goal of becoming a pilot for the United States Border Patrol. But back in those days, you had to be an agent on the ground for 3 years before you could apply to be a pilot. We didn't do street hires. So I got all my training, got my certificates, joined the Border Patrol, and then I never did become a pilot. And it was really by choice. 3 years went by pretty quickly. I really enjoyed the job more than I ever envisioned. And then I just never applied to be a Border Patrol agent or a pilot. I ended up staying the agent course pretty much my whole career.
I mentioned a bit of your biography in the introduction, but please fill in the blanks for us. Tell us about your career progress through the years and how your responsibilities changed.
So like everybody, I started out a Border Patrol agent on the front line. Again, my background or what I knew about the Border Patrol was Arizona, but the Border Patrol hired me and sent me to the one place I asked to not go, which was Southern California. My experience, what I'd seen in Arizona, Border Patrol was primarily a narcotics interdiction agency. But I showed up in San Diego and realized, this was back in 1992, realized that we have an illegal immigration problem. And anyway, frontline agent for several years. I ended up promoting in San Diego. And then after about 6 years, ultimately made it back to Arizona. But all that was frontline time. Matter of fact, most of my career until I got into senior leadership was actually on the line. I spent several more years in Arizona. Coincidentally, by the time I transferred to Arizona, we had built a significant amount of barrier in San Diego. We had hired a lot more Border Patrol agents and kind of were implementing this new strategy of deterrence. And Southern California was coming under control, so Arizona was actually seeing a significant influx. So I kind of followed that influx. Spent about 5 years in Arizona, did ATVs out in the desert, built the Tucson's ATV program, doing a lot of things that, most people that like the outdoors would actually want to pay to do, and I was getting paid to do it. It was a great time. Right up until 9/11, to be quite honest. And then when 9/11 hit, like everybody in America, they went into this time of reflection. Well, the U.S. Border Patrol did the same thing. We moved from Department of Justice to Department of Homeland Security with this new focus, this new mission of anti-terrorism, which no one had ever talked about before. No one ever, and the Border Patrol is all about illegal immigration and narcotics. I got pulled into that world. This would be a whole nother show, but I mouthed off in a briefing about some things that were frustrating me. I was only a first line supervisor at the time. But there was a bunch of headquarters people in the room. And next thing I knew I was getting asked to go to Washington, D.C. and put my money where my mouth is and help fix some of those issues. So I ended up going up to D.C., spent about 5 years working on anti-terrorism issues, getting exposed, to be quite honest, though, to other threats that face this nation. That as a frontline agent, they were right there in front of me, but I never saw it, and none of my leadership ever talked about it. And it really kind of opened my eyes and made me wake up to how important border security is and what a fundamental part of national security it is. And then literally the rest of my career is kind of just weird. Like the last job I ever applied for, actually, knowingly applied for, was first line supervisor. Every job after that, someone approached me and asked me if I was willing to go help fix something or take a leadership position. I ended up moving through a few different roles. I was the deputy chief for the San Diego sector, which is basically the whole coast of California, for a few years. Then I became the chief in El Centro, California, which is the inland portions of California. Again, the border all the way up to Oregon, but more inland. And then the administrations changed. The border wall, border technology became a big deal. The chief in San Diego retired, and they asked me to go take over that position. And they say if you get too close to the sun, you might get burnt. I got asked to brief President Trump on Border Patrol strategy, the border wall prototypes, what we learned from that, and some other stuff. And then just seemed like nothing was really the same after that. I was constantly being asked just questions and being pulled up to DC for details. And then ultimately ended up getting asked to be chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. Did that until August of 2021 when I retired.
So it's going to be careful what you wish for type of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't wish for it, but yeah. Be careful when you speak out. Yeah.
Exactly. Was that your punishment to send you up to DC?
Sort of. I wouldn't say I went willingly. I mean, totally transparent. I didn't want that job. If you think about it, military is a little bit the same way. You don't get into, they don't have recruitment posters or videos of someone sitting behind a desk reviewing paperwork all day and sitting in meetings and saying yes, no, left, right. You lose all the things that you really joined up for when you move into those senior positions. And I really still enjoyed my job. I liked going out in the field talking to the agents, and you lose a lot of that when you go to DC. But you do get the opportunity to implement things and fix things that have bugged you over your whole career. So that part of it I did like. I liked that my voice was heard, that people listened. The Trump, not to get political, but the Trump administration was a very unique time, I think, where the entire administration was very open and actually mandated engagement and debate. And they wanted to know, what works, what doesn't work, and they were willing to try things. It was a fun time to be in leadership. And so I'm glad for that, but it wasn't something I sought out.
So I mentioned at the beginning of the show, when you were the chief of the Border Patrol, there were 21,000 agents. If you remember, how many were there when you started? And then what happened post 9/11 when you switched to Homeland Security?
Sure. When I joined the Border Patrol, it was one of the first surges, and they just went over 4,000 agents. So over my career, we grew dramatically. There was incremental growth before 9/11. But after 9/11, because of the realization of the threats coming at us, the Border Patrol doubled in size, and then it doubled in size again, if you will. The challenge with that is there wasn't any rhyme or reason. There's not a math problem out there that says, hey, this is how many Border Patrol agents we need. It was literally Congress just kind of doubling the size, and that brings a lot of challenges with developing personnel and promoting people. You've got to have leaders, whether they're ready or not, when you grow that fast. And then you expand everything else. People think about the agents, but they all need vehicles. They all need uniforms. They need facilities to go change out in. They need places to take illegal aliens, and all of that, what I would just call business. Some people call bureaucratic, but really it's like running a giant business. Those were all things that they doubled and tripled as well.
Patrolling the border, and especially the southern border like you did for most of your career, is obviously very dangerous work. What should the general public and the people in our audience understand and appreciate about what our Border Patrol officers experience day in and day out?
Hey, thank you for asking that, because it's a little bit nuanced, but I want to make sure people understand the challenge. So the Border Patrol is facing very, very heavily armed We call them transnational criminal organizations. The public commonly refers to them as cartels or drug syndicates. But that is a realization, and those same individuals are trafficking human beings, and it's all about the money. At the same time, and sometimes within seconds, those Border Patrol agents will encounter a group of illegal aliens that don't really understand how they're being used by the cartel for much bigger, more strategic purposes. They just think they're trying to come to the United States and get a job. They're going to be most of the time compliant and not really understand their surroundings. But Border Patrol agents have to flip that switch back and forth constantly throughout the entire shift within microseconds, because you can't approach a group just like it's economic migrants, and then next thing you know, you're basically in a gun battle with Mexican cartel. So I think that's the most challenging part, is you have no idea what you're engaging with in most cases until you're face to face with the individuals, and a lot of times that's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning without the benefit of a lot of light.
Well, and you mentioned sort of flipping that switch to different situations throughout your 8-hour or 12-hour shift, whatever it may be. Our show Next Steps Forward is about resilience and well-being, and I can think of few jobs that require more resilience and will be more taxing on someone's well-being than patrolling our borders. What strategies or practices did you use to manage the stress that comes with being with such high pressure position?
So from a very, very personal standpoint, I was raised in a Christian home. I have a pretty strong faith in God, so prayer was a big part of mine. Luckily, as well, for most of my career, I was single when I first got in, but most of my career, I had a very, very supportive wife and family. And then I tied it back to the mission, though. I really, truly believed in the mission, and luckily, so did everybody around me. So that gives you a whole nother level of support. It's a lot easier to explain to people why you're missing a birthday or a special event when they believe that it's a bigger, better cause. And then on more of a tangible physical level, find a way to just zone out and do something you enjoy. So I enjoy hiking. I enjoy running outside. That's usually the time I come up with new ideas, kind of clears my mind. So whether it be in a gym or whether it be outside working out, I always try to get that exercise time. And then for me specifically, outside was always way better than inside, because it's just a different level of peace. But I would try to manage that. And that's not going to be the same for everybody, but I encourage everybody, regardless of your career field, you got to find that time, and you got to figure out how to have that support structure around you. It just makes it so much better.
And thanks to our time zone differences, you had an extra hour before the show today to kind of catch up on life. So I'm glad that worked out for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned your family, your faith, your spouse. Including them, who or what did you rely on for support during the toughest moments of your career, and how important was it to have that strong support system?
It was super important, especially as you move up. People joke around, it's lonely at the top, but it really is. And I can't even get into that. It's hard to explain to somebody if you haven't been there, but the information that you can share with people around you a lot of times is less and less, because it's either sensitive or it's personnel issues, or it's the chief of the Border Patrol. And I don't mean to make this sound cliche or anything, but you're constantly on display. And it's not that you're putting on a show, but you realize very quickly that your attitude, your demeanor is contagious. So if you're not upbeat, if you're, anyway, it just affects everybody around you, affects the whole group. So having my wife, but having that prayer time, and then honestly, it's kind of weird. I ended up having a couple of friends that had nothing to do with my world, even age difference, significant age difference, where they were talking about, challenges in a master's program and asking me questions that got my mind completely and totally off of national security and whatever the incident of the day was. I think finding those relief valves is critically important. And then I found out it helped other people as well. So it's kind of a dominoes.
Win-win.
Yeah.
What kept you motivated, focused, and driven, and especially in the face of your toughest challenges? Was there a particular philosophy or belief that guided you?
So a couple things. Again, on more like a spiritual level, I didn't want these jobs, but I felt like I was called to do it, and I was being asked to do it. So I felt like there was a bigger purpose. But when you really dive into border security and understand at the fundamental basic level, It's just making sure we know who and what enters our home on behalf of all Americans and how important that is. That in and of itself becomes a bigger mission. So I would get I would get discouraged just like everybody else. And towards the end of my career, when things were changing and kind of getting a little chaotic and people weren't listening, it was even worse. But I would literally go look at what was called significant incident reports each day. So within the United States Border Patrol every day, things that meet a certain threshold get reported up to a national level. And I would get a stack of those every day, whether they be individuals on the terrorist watch list or criminals or heroic events. Basically, every day I would look at those and remind myself that the mission of the United States Border Patrol really matters. And even if people in Kansas don't understand how much safer they are today because of what those agents are doing on the line, they are. And that kept me motivated, and it keeps me motivated today. It's a reason I keep speaking out and try to make sure that Americans really understand what's going on at the border, and they get out of like the media talking points and just the political angles.
Well, maybe as a follow-up to that, a little bit off script here, you know, you and I were talking before the show that a lot of folks don't know or think about human trafficking, which we'll get into a little bit more. And you talked about how people coming over, they think they're coming for a job in the United States when there are more than likely than not ulterior motives. You know, when you turn the news on, pick whatever channel your outlet is, for some reason, I always see Eagle Pass, Texas on there. So you mentioned the family in Kansas who might not know what goes on. You know, they might be saying, well, why is it so hard if the TV camera is seeing Eagle Pass, Texas every day? Why don't they just bring more Border Patrol agents and block it there? I know it's not that simple, but I'm just sort of trying to build a little bit on that.
Yeah, so it's not that simple. So really what it comes down to, so I am going to make it simple just for a second, because I think border security can become so big and overwhelming, people just, they can't grasp it. So I need every one of the listeners out there to just think about your own personal home. Border security is exactly the same as your home. You get to establish the rules of who and what comes into your home. On a national level, you elected Congress to basically pass laws. But at the end of the day, you have a front door, and you expect guests and visitors to come to your home through that front door, and you expect to be able to control who and what enters. If anybody tries to sneak into your home outside the front door, that's going to elicit some type of a negative response from you in most cases. On the national level, it's the same thing. But on the national level, we have 328 front doors. They're called official ports of entry. That's where everybody's supposed to come and go. Border Patrol's job is really just to make sure people come and go through those front doors. But just like your home, depending on where you live, you have to decide how much of your resources you're going to assign to securing that home. We have over 2,000 miles of southern border. We have coasts that I won't even go into that right now. And then we have this entire border with Canada, plus we have Puerto Rico, Hawaii. We could literally bankrupt the country if you just assign personnel to stand along the entire border. So we make all these different investments. But at the end of the day, this is the key. Everybody needs to understand. Every time you've ever opened your door when somebody knocked on it, you did a quick threat assessment and you decided whether you're letting that person in or not. Every investment we make in border security, in walls and technology and everything else, is giving that Border Patrol agent more time to do that threat assessment. Because what you just said really, really matters. An agent, the only way agents have ever detected human trafficking, child trafficking coming across the border between the ports of entry has been through good interviews. Because most of the time, the victim doesn't really know they're being trafficked yet. They literally think that they're just coming into the United States to get a better job. And they've been coached to lie and say that these are their parents, that it's actually a family. And unless agents have time to do that deep dive interview, we're never going to figure it out. That's the biggest threat. So this mass illegal immigration we're having today, it took away all that time. So agents don't have any time to interview anybody. And again, you literally, we don't have enough resources to just surge to every single, like say to Eagle Pass and then to Rio Grande Valley, then to San Diego. The cartels have gotten too smart. No one crosses the southwest border without working with the cartels, even if they don't have to pay them. The cartels are scripting the entrance so that they can shape the border. What I mean by that is they can overwhelm law enforcement, create systematic gaps, and then they can get through that second wave. We had a strategy in place that included deterrence, that included infrastructure to be able to slow down the flow so that we could actually control that better. But at the end of the day, the only way we find out that those trafficking victims are actually being trafficked is through those interviews. So we really need to buy the agents more time. It's not just a detect and then return. There's just so much more to it than that.
I really appreciate you using that analogy and taking us through, think of it as your home. But then also, I think part two of that is, I think most folks don't realize that you have to do that interview process and how much time that takes and what you're actually trying to get from that individual. So I really appreciate you walking us through that, because that gives a lot more clarity in terms of your day-to-day mission and what is actually happening out there that we obviously all take for granted.
Yeah, and that interview is the most important part, because the other thing people miss a lot of times, and sometimes there's even government officials give information that's misleading. There's no worldwide global database of criminals or terrorists or child traffickers. We have information on people that have been in the U.S. before, but agents have to actually talk to these people. We'll fingerprint them and take photographs, but that's only bounced off of U.S. databases. So really, that interview is the most critical aspect to figure out what is going on, and does this person pose a threat to America, or are they a victim of trafficking? Are they smuggling narcotics or whatever else?
When you reflect on your career, how do you measure your success and the impact you've had?
So that changed dramatically. So early on in my career, it was the old-fashioned statistics. How many arrests did I make? Did I get a big drug seizure? Just outputs, if you will. But as my career went on, it was more about outcomes. And then, while it wasn't what I signed up for, the mission really becomes, or the function of your duties become less and less about securing the border. That's the front agent's job. It's your job to get them the resources that they need. But it's to basically get them the resources they need, to get them strategies, to basically kind of get them the freedom, the ability to do their job. So I would say towards the end of my career, I measured my success on, the morale of the agents and everything else, but on the number of people around me that actually got promoted. So what became one of my big focuses over my career and kind of my leadership strategies, that I wanted to create a leadership environment that really empowered everyone around me to excel, because then that made the whole organization excel. And as I saw different people that I interacted with, basically get highlighted by either other organizations or even within our own organization and get promoted into leadership positions and then go on to make a difference. That's really how I measured my long-term success, because that sustains the mission of the agency versus just the arrests of a day. But I never discount, the actual enforcement either.
As a leader, how'd you handle the criticism, whether from the public, media, Congress, and administration, or within your own agency? And were you able to turn that criticism into an opportunity for growth?
So with border security, just because it is so political, and it has been for years, some people want to focus on just the immigration aspect of it. I think I just learned early on to deal with the criticism. And most of the time I realized that it's not well informed. But that was the angle that I took. So I spent a lot of my career in California and spent a lot of time with a lot of elected officials that all they wanted to do was criticize. But over and over and over again, when I actually met people, and this sounds kind of cheesy, but a lot of times I would very intentionally take the uniform off and meet people in a public setting, like at a public meeting of leaders or whatever, in suit and tie, shake hands with them, say hi. I guess I've been told I don't exactly look like the stereotypical, big bad Border Patrol agent or whatever. But I would kind of get a crack in that armor. And then I would invite, once I told them what I did do, I'd invite them to come down to the border and just do a 1-hour tour with me. And it was amazing. Most people had made all their judgments without the facts. They'd gone through a port of entry. They'd gone through like Customs and Border Protection at the airport maybe, but they really didn't understand what happens in the dirt in between those major crossing points. And when they did, they almost every single time walked away and said, this is more complicated than I thought, and it started opening a dialogue. But really, kind of breaking through that first layer is the hard part, because you're not going to get a chance to take most people to the border. But anyway, that's just, I did try to find opportunities through the criticism. But a lot of times you just got to look at it and go, yeah, they're wrong. I can't convince the world they're wrong because they're not going to listen to me. But the mission is right and it's important, and you just press on.
So when people actually had the facts and it wasn't as easy as they thought it was, they finally figured it out. There's a bigger problem than they thought.
I would say like 80 to 90% of them. And again, I'll stay out of the politics. The current political environment is a little bit unique. As chief of the Border Patrol after the transition, I found quite a few people that they just flat out refused to go to the border and refused to avail themselves to new knowledge. But usually when people would avail themselves and actually go, 99.9% of the time they would walk away and go, hey, wait a minute, this isn't exactly what I thought it was. This is important. We need to figure out, how to do this better. But you got to be open to the information.
What advice would you give to aspiring leaders who want to achieve greatness in their careers?
So I'll tell you, a lot of academics don't like what I'm going to say now because I didn't have a career plan. Just focus on the job you have today. So I've watched so many of my peers that, they had they aspired to some kind of a leadership position and they kept focusing on what they wanted instead of what they had. So I touched on a minute ago. I look back and basically a lot of it was just my upbringing. I was taught to just do your best today, whatever you were assigned. And then after my first line supervisor job, other people approached me and asked me to take on progressively harder, more challenging leadership positions. I think that's a much better position to be in. But the only reason they did that is because not only did I do what was assigned to me, I actually sought out opportunities, to make the environment around me better for myself and others. But really what it comes down to is putting your full effort and abilities into whatever your task is today. And I think that you'll shine and people will end up promoting you.
So I'm going to show my age a little bit here. There's an old story about Nikita Khrushchev, former premier of Russia. When Khrushchev was forced out as the leader of the Soviet Union, he sat down and wrote 2 letters to his successor, Leonid Brezhnev. He said, quote, when you get yourself in a situation you can't get out of, open the first letter and you'll be safe. When you get yourself into another situation you can't get out of, open the second letter. Brezhnev soon found himself in a tough spot, so he opened the first letter and read it. And it said, blame everything on me. So that's what Brezhnev did, and it worked. Eventually, as all leaders, or most leaders do, he got himself into a second difficult situation he couldn't get out of, so he opened the second letter. And it said, sit down and write 2 letters. What advice, if any, did you give to your successor, Raul Ortiz, as U.S. Border Patrol, and did you leave 2 letters for him?
Yeah, I am familiar with that story. I did not leave 2 letters for him, but for a different reason. He was my deputy. When I was the chief of the Border Patrol, Raul was my deputy chief. So we literally interacted every single day at staff meetings and then offline. We had a unified strategy. We didn't agree on everything, but we would argue or debate things, as a team and move forward. So when I handed off, I was very confident, that I already kind of shared with him everything I possibly could share with him, but it was also a unique time. Unlike a regular corporation, the administration had changed, their focus had changed dramatically, like 180 degrees. I was basically pushed out. I won't even sugarcoat it because I was pro border security. And I guess if there was any advice I gave to him, it was, hey, eat lunch, spend time with them, try to win them over, but it's going to be small incremental wins. You're not going to be able to actually convince them that border security matters. But the Border Patrol is also a little bit different. I had created an executive board within the U.S. Border Patrol because we have regional sector chiefs that have tremendous experience. So I kind of created an executive level board where we were engaging with all of them. And really that's where I gave more, not a letter per se, but more of the advice long term. And then many of them, I stay out of the politics, but many of them reach out to me still today. And I take that as a huge success. Just asking me how to navigate, recommendations, how to navigate certain issues. But really what it comes down to is don't overreact. Have baseline core values that you've decided well in advance that you are not going to cross that line. And if you're asked to cross the line, it's time to retire or quit or whatever else. But short of that, I think when you're upfront and you tell people what you believe in, what your boundaries are, what your leadership strategy is, it takes away a lot of the, the questions and stuff, and it just kind of makes things easier. But someday you might be held to those. So
You've mentioned a few times, and it's one of my 3 rules on the show of we don't want to get into politics. but you just said something that's very intriguing to me. You were pro Border Patrol. You're pushed out because of that. You're a chief of the U.S. Border Patrol, but you're pushed out because you believe in Border Patrol. I don't know if we want to give an answer for that or not, but that just I think that might highlight everything that's wrong in terms of how we're addressing this as a nation. In terms, like you said, DC makes it political. Certainly the last several election cycles. That's just mind-boggling to me that you were pushed out because you believe in the job that you were doing and what the whole department is charged to do.
And again, without getting too political, I think this is an important point, Chris. So years and years and years ago, I sat in a leadership class and wrote down, forced to kind of core values, leadership strategy, all this other stuff. And it kind of refined over time. But the one thing that I wrote down immediately, and in law enforcement, it's critically important, is integrity. And literally, for the first time in my career, I was asked to publicly make statements that were not true, and got into quite the argument with that. And that's what I meant. If you have core values and you state them and write them down, you got to live by them. So I couldn't stay in that situation. So I ended up having to retire because I wasn't going to make those statements. And that's not a political statement. That is like what you just said. It's where we are today, and it's scary.
Very scary. And thank you for sticking to your beliefs and, for lack of a better phrase, sticking to your guns. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision, but thank you for that, which is going to help us transition to part 2 of your life. You retired from the Border Patrol, and you could have stayed retired. What is it about your new role, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, that keeps you coming into work?
It matters. I still believe in America. I understand. I've been exposed to the threats that are coming across that border every single day, the real significant threats to this country. And then I've watched those threats be watered down on mainstream media, and basically America told that it's just this economic migrants. There's really no threat. They ignore the cartel. They ignore the human trafficking. Average Americans, they don't know. And I don't know how they would know if somebody's not out there actually advocating and speaking the truth. So it's funny you said that. My wife and I had a debate back and forth, and I would actually, again, a little transparent, God and I probably had a little bit of an argument in the debate. I'm like, hey, I chose a law enforcement job with a good retirement where I could retire a little bit younger for a reason. I'm ready to go, hang out at the lake and go fish. But I was told I was exposed. I felt like I was being told I was exposed to all of this. I had all these opportunities, and I owed it to America to just share the truth because no one else really was, and no one else actually had the information I even had to be able to share. So when I retired, I'm sorry, this is going to be long-winded. 2 people from the last administration called and told me, hey, hit the pause button really quick. You need to talk to your wife, because if you speak out publicly, you will lose a very, very significant amount of potential income. And I was like, what? Like, yeah, have you ever noticed how hardly any prior military leaders or law enforcement leaders ever speak out? It's really because corporate America is trying to sell stuff to the government, and they don't want political lightning rods at all. So if you speak out, you're gonna lose this opportunity. And anyway, I won't get into all that. So they're like, if you want to continue to stay engaged, here's some options. And one of them that was really intriguing to me was Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's nonpartisan. It just advocates. In my case, they brought me on as a border security expert and immigration to advocate for just what makes sense for America, putting Americans and American safety first. And it gave me a way to continue to engage at a national level. I've testified before Congress on several occasions. And again, just factual about what's going on. The fact that for 27 years, we were improving a strategy that was making America safer every single day. It was bipartisan, and kind of sharing that information and what changed. But bottom line, it's because it matters. You do not have a country if you do not have secure borders. And there's a ton of people out there today that are kind of misleading Americans. And I call it kind of like hijacking their compassion by showing, some picture of a family or something. And they leave out the fact that, yeah, maybe that's a family, maybe it's not. Because there's this huge portion of quote unquote families crossing the border that are actually human trafficking. But now with this mass illegal immigration, and basically they shut off DNA testing, we don't even have any way to detect them. The fact that most Americans today, they don't understand that 61% of the cross-border illegal aliens or the cross-border illegal flow right now are single adults. It's like over 60,000 single adults from China that the Chinese government is actually coordinating and systematically infiltrating into the United States. But these are things no one talks about. And I just couldn't hold that information and go fish, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad you're not fishing. We need you out there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here because you've touched on it a bit. We talked about the role of cartels and the issue of human trafficking. And I think when most people hear the word cartel, they think of drug trafficking. Who is responsible for human trafficking and sex trafficking into the United States? And is it coming from just the southern border or other borders?
No, the America, unfortunately, and this is the narcotics too, we're consumers. So we're one of the biggest consumers of basically child trafficking anywhere in the world. It's horrible. And that is a huge problem. But because of that, criminal elements are going to try to get that into the United States, whether it be through cyber and internet porn, or whether it's actually individuals coming into the United States. Most Americans don't know that the Super Bowl is one of the biggest targets for sex trafficking, in child trafficking in the world. It's horrible because of the amount of money and influence. So it's everywhere. However, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. It's the ability of law enforcement to have a conversation with people coming into the country and then detect it. So the southwest border is the most significant threat because of the chaos that's going on down there. And everything that crosses the southwest border is controlled by the cartels, and that's the reason we started calling them transnational criminal organizations. They're just in it to make money. Narcotics has traditionally been the biggest money maker for them, and it really still is. They use the illegal aliens to basically mask and provide cover so they can get in that second wave. But that second wave, that people that they pay extra to avoid law enforcement, often include those being trafficked. It often includes the terrorists. It often includes the criminals. But if it's coming across the southwest border, the cartels are controlling it. And unfortunately, the dynamic we have today, that really means, and I want people to understand this, that really means that by policy, we have made a conscious decision to allow the Mexican drug cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, to pick and choose who enters our country instead of us. With the current dynamic, all the immigration laws, all the custom laws are kind of a joke because we literally don't have the willingness to stop them from entering illegally and force them to come through a port of entry where we can have a conversation.
Obviously, if the cartels are involved in anything, it's purely for profit.
Yeah.
And you talked about drug profit. You talked about human and sex trafficking profit. I've heard numbers thrown around of 150 billion or higher for human and sex trafficking. Do you have any sense of what that number is? I know it's illegal money.
I've heard some of the same scenarios. It's clearly in the billions. There's really no perfect way to track it. We look at remittances, money from the U.S. going back to Mexico, but more and more they've found ways to basically mask that through purchases. And even think about those shared or the value cards, like a card from Target or a Visa card with cash on it. That's another way that they're actually, in the last few years, have really ramped up basically being able to launder money and move money around. And then now crypto has made it even harder than ever. But here's the bottom line. It doesn't matter. I mean, it gives you a volume, but these are lives. So these are human lives. These are kids that some of the parents literally have sold their children to be recycled to make fake families. And the kid's entire life, people think about sex trafficking, but think about this. The kid's entire life is traveling through Mexico from the Guatemalan border with some new family that he just became his family, so that by the time he gets to the border, he'll be comfortable with them and he won't give off the signs that it's a fake family, just to allow them to use loopholes in the U.S. law to get released into the U.S. And then he's shipped back to do it again and again and again. And the simple tools and techniques in place, which literally could be fingerprints and a photograph, DNA testing. If he's under 14, this administration has decided not to use any of those tools. So literally, like, it's just recurring over and over again. So I don't care if it's $8 billion or $2 trillion. I want to save those lives. That kid would have had a much better life in Guatemala or Honduras than he's ever going to have doing that repetitive recycling.
So you're raising a lot of different issues that, for obvious reasons, aren't really talked about in mainstream media. I never heard about recycling of children for the fake families. So I'm learning something new every time we have these conversations. What can we as a country, we as a society, we as the United States of America do to learn more, to become more educated, and to do more?
So the biggest thing today, and this isn't easy, you got to do your research. So when I was chief of the Border Patrol towards the end of my career, people would ask me all the time, hey, what do you think the biggest threat to America is? And I think they were always surprised because chief of the Border Patrol, when I would say the death of true journalism. Journalism really doesn't exist except on platforms like this now, social media, every now and then, independent journalists, but mainstream media, and I don't care if you're on the far right or far left, it's spoon feeding you what you want to hear, and you're missing the rest of the story, as the guy used to always say, right? I think people need to actually do their own research, and there's places that you can get information. So I talked a little bit about statistics today. I don't want you to trust anything I said. I want you to go to this website, and it's basically Customs and Border Protections, but it's www.cbp, customsandborderprotection.gov. And there's a tab on there for newsroom, and there's stats and summaries. And you can look at how many illegal aliens are crossing, how many terrorists, how many criminals. It's available right there publicly, but most people don't take advantage of that. I really want people to just dive in, look at the issues, but look a little deeper. Don't believe some of these, again, I mentioned before, I'm Christian, I go to church, but I get in debates all the time with these social justice people that want to hijack your compassion and focus on the individual illegal alien that may be cleaning their house and not talk about how that illegal alien provided cover for the cartel to smuggle a bunch of children to be sex trafficked or forced labor or whatever else, or the fentanyl and how it all goes together. Just do some research, slow down a little bit, look into the issue, and then please go vote your values. Pay attention to what the real true issues are, and then go vote, because that's how we control things in this country.
What's that website again?
www.cbp, as in C as in customs, B as in border, P as in protection, .gov, G-O-V. And there's a whole bunch of statistics on there that are publicly available. Hey, last but not least, this is a pet peeve of mine. Mm-hmm. For Americans to vote, they need to be informed. So I advocate for every American to push for their legislators to mandate that we really truly have transparency in government, that every federal agency that touches illegal immigration across border in any way, shape, or form, to include funding of NGOs that are shipping people all over the country, that should just be public. It should be on a website. You should know where your tax money goes, and it should not be hard. You shouldn't have to do a FOIA to get basic information about what your government is doing on your behalf.
To the best of your knowledge, what are the primary factors driving the most recent surges in illegal immigration at the southern border?
It's as easy, no consequences. So for 27 years, the Border Patrol, the U.S. government, if you will, was systematically building out a strategy on the border built on deterrence. It was physical deterrence through border walls, agents on the line, but there was also deterrence by having consequences for committing a crime. It is illegal to enter the United States in between ports of entry without documentation. We would prosecute people and we would deport them back to their country. And regardless, in the human war, and when there's humans involved, think about this for a minute, you would do the same thing. If you are entering the United States, if you're going anywhere and your family's worried about you, when you get to your destination, you call home, right? And you just tell them what's going on, period. So when illegal aliens start their trek out and then they get caught in coming across in the United States, or they walk up and surrender, and then they get released and they get a free ticket to New York or Chicago or wherever they want to go. They get put in a hotel. They get free food. They tell their friends and family about that just because they're checking in. So above and beyond the cartel's marketing, now you have millions of people marketing worldwide. Because, by the way, 180 different nations were caught crossing that border illegally, not just South America or Mexico. That word goes out, and then the second wave, the third wave, the fourth wave comes. You stop it by simply holding people accountable. We have laws in place that say you should not be allowed to enter the United States without legal immigration documents, and if you do, you're going to get deported. We could line up 1 million Border Patrol agents on the border, but if you don't actually deport people consistent with federal law, If you still let them go into the United States and be free for several years waiting for a hearing, this onslaught will continue forever.
Maybe as a follow-up to that, are there seasonal patterns to these surges? And how do these patterns impact the operations and strategies of the U.S. Border Patrol?
So over my career, there really were, but they're gone. So early in my career, there were seasonal migration patterns based on harvest season in the United States. And that's what a lot of Americans still think about when they think about the border. They think about illegal aliens coming across to like pick apples or lettuce or something and then going back into Mexico. That dynamic is long gone. You see people crossing the border now with suitcases and very nice clothes. They just know they're going to be released. So there are peaks and valleys based on like heat waves and actual cold. People forget about the Southwest, but a lot of it is mountainous. So in the winter, it does get very cold, and there'll be slowdown when it's super hot or super slow. But those are not like the traditional seasonal peaks and valleys that we used to have. And honestly, even right now, the valleys far exceed the Border Patrol's capability to effectively manage and determine who and what is in our country. So there really isn't, you don't have the luxury of making those operational adjustments anymore.
You've mentioned national security threat a few times throughout our conversation. What are the key security threats and concerns for the East and West Coasts, and are maritime security threats different from land-based border issues?
So they are, and they were always factored in, but it's a vast open area, for example. So the threats do vary. Commercial shipping, but the commercial shipping gets inspected. We have challenges there. But the coasts are wide open. So this is how the Southwest border affects that, though. I'll give you an example. Southern California, when I was the chief out there, we had boats landing all the way up to as far, almost just to San Francisco, with 8,000 to 10,000 pounds of narcotics, LA South full of illegal aliens from a bunch of different countries. But as we secured the Southwest border, we were able to shift Border Patrol agents to work with state and local, and we were actually getting pretty effective at catching those boats landing at remote areas along the coast or coming in even to harbors. But unfortunately, the chaos of the border has pulled all those resources away. And again, it's just like your house. I want you to think about it like that. If you don't have the mechanisms in place to make sure somebody comes through your front door, you really don't have any security. So it's not just the Southwest border that gets most of the attention, but it's all of our borders. Thank God we have a great relationship with Canada, so it's not as challenging up there as it is with Mexico. But even the Canadian borders, there's still threats. We still need to patrol it, and we need those resources out there, making sure that we are deciding who and what enters our home, not the cartels.
I love how you keep bringing it back to the home analogy, because that really makes it personal, something we can think about and identify with. And so thank you for bringing it down for folks like me to kind of think about and chew on. We have just a few minutes left. You talked earlier about the website they could go to. What else can we as average Americans do to help with the issues at the borders?
So I think actually, let's just say that you do your research and you start learning and it opens your eyes a little bit. I think the thing that is still missing is literally civil conversation between friends and relatives that don't necessarily agree. And it's challenging. I'm not sugarcoating that at all. I have some of the same challenges. However, that's really where we make a difference. I tell people all the time when I'm talking to different groups now that whether I like it or not, I'm kind of seen as a talking head, like a political. I have an angle, of course. So unless I have a relationship with somebody, they're not really going to change their opinion based on something I give them. It's literally the small group, the neighbor mentality, or like churches would talk about, like small groups, where you build a relationship and then you have those conversations. That is where we start educating America. That's where we make the biggest difference. So I just ask every one of your listeners today, your viewers, hey, don't just take this information and then get more angry or more polarized in your position, assuming you support border security. Please think about how you can convey this information or tell somebody else to watch this podcast, but figure out a way to get other people to understand that the border really is super complex and super simple, but have those conversations so that they get out of that media cycle where they're just being spoon-fed what they want.
You and I were talking before the show today. We were connected through mutual friends, Andy Berger and BQ Cullum. And I told you then that I never thought about human trafficking and sex trafficking before meeting those two fantastic heroes. I mean, we need more people like that out there. And to your point, just get more engaged and more involved, because like I said, this is something I knew nothing about. And since that, about 3.5 years ago, when I first had Andy on, that's now become a major focus for me personally, but also for the show in terms of raising the awareness, yelling from the top of the mountain, hey, we've got an issue here. Open your eyes, open your ears, be educated in terms of what your decisions are going to be, and to do something, because to your point, we can't just be spoon-fed by whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is. Just do what you got to do.
I agree, Chris. Thank you. I don't know how a better way to end it than that.
So, Rodney Scott, really, thank you so much for being with us today. It was an absolute honor, and it takes a special person and character to do what you do. And so thank you for your service.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for helping share the truth, though, man. This is the most important thing out there today.
Absolutely. And thank you to our audience, which now includes people in over 50 countries, for joining us for another episode of Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details on upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure, and on X at Chris Meek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.